Good afternoon to all of you. Welcome to this session. If somebody from the US is joining us, it's 9 o'clock in the morning at your place, at least in Washington, where our speaker, Elif Gokcigdem, is today. So I will present you in a second, Elif. Thank you very much for joining us. And thanks to all of you who are listening to this webinar. We have been looking very much forward to it. It's a second webinar in a series of 5, arranged by Identity on the Line. And just a second, Identity on the Line is a large-scale cooperation project between 6 cultural history museums and 1 university from Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Croatia, Lithuania, Poland, and Slovenia. So altogether, we are working on migration processes for 4 years, talking to migrants, former migrants, and their descendants. And on our way, we would like to get, or we hope to get, much input from other professionals who have more experience than we in some of our working areas. Therefore, among others, we have a series of webinars this autumn. And as I said, this is the second webinar in this series. So I would like to introduce our speaker to you. Before I do so, I would like you please to be a little bit cautious when you log off today after this webinar. There will be evaluation popping up on your screen. And we would very much appreciate if you could take the time and please just answer some questions. Also, please check out our website. There will be 3 more webinars in the next 3 weeks. And I'm sure you will find them quite helpful for migration, identity, personal narratives, all kinds of topics which are related to this working field. So, Elif, now I would like to introduce you, and I have called you Elif almost as we have known as each other for a long time. We haven't, but I've heard a great speech of you some years ago, and I really got interested in your work. So, Dr. Elif Gokcigdem, you have worked with empathy for 15, 20 years in all different kind of academic areas. You have combined academic knowledge and technical abilities. You have had a summit with the Dalai Lama, sorry, standing still. Mm-hmm. And you have worked with professionals, maybe not so much in museums or only in museums. You have worked with professionals in different fields of study to increase their knowledge, not only that technical knowledge, but also their practical abilities to work with empathy with other people. Among others, you have been editing 2 books, which I have here, in 2016 and 2019. And they are really comprehensive and combine a lot of different case studies about how you can translate empathy from one group to another group, among people, among communities. So empathy work is what you do, aren't I right?
Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction. Shall I share my screen?
I think we start our screen now, and for all our listeners, we can say that there will be approximately 10 minutes in the end where we can have questions through the chat, for example. But now, first, your presentation, Elif.
Thank you so much for the invitation again, and for it's really an honor to present to this group. So I hope everybody will find the information useful. So here we go. So can everyone see it? I hope everyone can see it, right?
That's great, yes.
For some reason, I cannot. Okay. So I just wanted to provide you with a quick overview, to highlight the content of today's presentation. This, as Catherine said, this work represents ongoing work that started sometime in 2013 in a more official capacity. And the 2 volumes published, Fostering Empathy Through Museums in 2016 and Designing for Empathy in 2019, collectively include a variety of contributors from a wide spectrum of museums and expertise from other institutions, mostly in the US, with a few examples in Europe. In 2018, the Empathy Building Through Museums initiative received an invitation from the Office of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to have an audience with him, and also to conduct a week-long workshop on empathy building in collaboration with the host organization, Tibet Museum in India. The content that I will present today is a reflection of this ongoing work. I hope you will find the ideas and examples presented here useful. Just to quickly, we will cover what is empathy and what is oneness mindset, empathy and museums as snapshots, 5 ways museum can foster empathy, then the alchemy of empathy, and then at the end, I would like to share some thoughts, sort of lessons learned on this journey. So you may be familiar with this chart, the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. This is a snapshot of the global problems that our world is facing today. 20 years ago, the United Nations expressed determination to collectively solve many of our global development problems, such as poverty, hunger, healthcare, education, economic inequality, and environmental sustainability. However, as we focus on each symptom, we continuously fail to see the core problem. No matter how many lists we may create and how many deadlines we may set, the most difficult thing is to get people to act, which often requires behavior change instigated by a perspective shift. I call this the elephant in the room phenomenon. The elephant in the room reminds me of an old Sufi story where in a village where no one has ever seen an elephant before, the Sultan brings an elephant and keeps him in a big dark room. Villagers are admitted to the room to see if anyone can tell what this is. Those who touch the legs think that this must be a grand building with columns. The ones who touch the ears think that this must be a very big carpet. The ones who touch the tail think that they have just encountered a giant snake. Recognizing the elephant in the room requires a holistic perspective, driven by an understanding that everything is connected. This has a lot to do about how we are brought up, our culture, and the stories we grew up with, as well as our physiological, emotional, and mental capacities. Most of the time, seeing the world as a whole requires a profound paradigm shift that begins with empathy. Empathy is a prerequisite of an understanding of our interconnectedness, which may lead to positive behavior change. When we take another's perspective and imagine that that could be me, we put ourselves in another's shoes, which inspires us to take action to alleviate that problem. So we can call this elephant the empathy deficit our world is experiencing now. It is there, everybody knows it, but we still call it different names and require numbers to justify its existence. Like oxygen, we take empathy for granted. Tragically, as we are experiencing right now in a pandemic world, when we scream for empathy, we know that it is essential to our survival, yet there's a shortage. So what is empathy, and how can we stop this vicious cycle of empathy deficit and start strategically and intentionally invest in empathy building in our world? When I first got interested in empathy, I did what any respected scholar would do. I Googled it. To my surprise, there were many different descriptions of empathy, depending on the discipline or the context within which empathy was being talked about. I decided to use the Webster Dictionary definition, which is the feeling that you understand and share another person's experiences and emotions, the ability to share someone else's feelings. My familiarity with empathy in the context of art history and aesthetics was telling me that there is more to empathy than just being a transactional engagement of mirror neurons in our brains. So with the help of a behavioral scientist, I developed this chart, which helped me visualize and find my way within the many layers and nuances of empathy. This is also the understanding of empathy I use in my work. The interesting thing about empathy is that it can be nurtured. Through practice, one can get more and more sophisticated in his/her ability to empathize, and it is contagious in a good way. For example, when you see a person eating a slice of lemon, the sourness you feel in your mouth is a result of emotional empathy. So you can see here, I don't know if everybody can read it, but I try to understand the levels of empathy or the nuances of empathy with the attributes, how do we recognize it, what skills does it take, the outcomes that it brings, and some of the pitfalls and that one may encounter. So emotional empathy is connecting with the other automatically, instinctively, which can be prone to manipulation because it's an initial emotional reaction. However, cognitive empathy, on the other hand, requires more effort. It requires us to imagine what it would feel like to be another. And at this level, we hear also in the news and in the literature that there's this empathy fatigue or compassion fatigue that people tend to experience. There's more research going on in that area because, as I said, it is not just the emotional or physiological thing, but it has a lot to do, our understanding and experience of empathy has a lot to do with how we are made actually. And compassionate empathy often is the result of a major life experience that might have caused a pragmatic perspective shift. These could be life events such as the loss of a loved one, giving birth to a child, a near-death experience, or what astronauts call the overview effect, where one suddenly finds himself or herself in a much larger scale of life, almost like someone just pulled the rug under your feet, and realizes how small we are, yet how unique, important, and empowered we are in our connectedness to the whole. A sense of humility, awe, and wonder follows, along with a quick reprioritization of what really matters in life. And most social entrepreneurs fall into this stage, because they have this idea that they have to serve the greater good, and really nothing can stop them. They keep trying, they fail, but they keep trying. That's why I left the pitfalls area empty. So empathy leads to an understanding and an appreciation of the fact that at any given time and place, there are multiple ways of looking at and seeing what we call reality, which could be a particular object, issue, or problem, as well as many ways that beings coexist and make sense of the universe in their own particular ways. Such a unifying worldview cannot be attained and sustained without empathy, our inherent ability to perceive and share the feelings of another. Empathy enables us to connect with ourselves and with others while awakening us into our interconnectedness as parts of a greater whole, all of humanity and the planet. An awareness of our interconnectedness calibrates and harmonizes our values, attitudes, and behavior. All of an appreciation for this interdependent whole inspires us to meaningfully engage with it through acts of compassion and altruism that recent scientific findings reveal are like chocolate to us. So once we experience the great feeling that we get from compassion and altruism, we tend to want to repeat it. Not only we are wired to connect, but also to find ways to serve the greater good. This phenomenon is a self-sustaining cycle powered by empathy, leading to compassion, altruism, and a rewarding sense of fulfillment of one's humanity. How we see is how we live it. That is why experiencing empathy is important, as it leads to an understanding of our interconnectedness and inspires us to change our behavior to preserve the whole of which we are all a part. Through the lens of oneness, or you may call this interconnectedness or interdependence, empathy is only the foundational element, not the ultimate goal. Empathy is an important tool that ignites a spark that wakes us up into our interconnectedness. And only within the context of oneness, empathy can fulfill its true promise by leading us to a realization of our human capacity of compassion and love. Some traditions of wisdom call this state love without an object, without reciprocity, and without an expectation or a reward. Similarly, empathy without an object could mean empathy as if there is no other, because all is one. Rumi, a 13th century poet, a refugee himself, who lived in a very turbulent time, very similar to ours, when the topics of his day also included war, famine, refugee crisis, and corrupt leaders, describes this human state in a poem. Rumi says, "Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right-doing, there is a field. I will meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other does not make any sense." Knowing that empathy can only be learned through lived experiences and authentic models, creating those spaces and experiences where individuals can discover their inherent ability of empathy in safe, non-judgmental spaces and communities become more essential. So now the question becomes, what do museums have to do with all this? Although empathy is a vital element of our nature and can even lead to a sense of fulfillment of our humanness, our civilization has not created the essential spaces, practices, and supporting ecosystems where it can be intentionally nurtured and unleashed towards the greater good. Yet research suggests that empathy can be taught, and that contact with people who are different from us in a safe, empathic way is the first step toward reducing prejudice. This is where museums have a role to play. Museums are safe and informal learning platforms, uniquely equipped to encourage visitors to imagine, explore, and experience our rich human heritage and our natural world firsthand. They have the capability to bring together arts, technology, sciences, and literature to show how all things are interconnected. They can also help fulfill an increasing demand for empathy in our lives, our workplaces, and our institutions. With these thoughts, I set out to compiling my first book that focuses on empathy and museums. Knowing the urgency that we have just discussed, I knew that empathy must be considered not as a byproduct, but as an intentional outcome of an experience. But was this happening already, and how, and by whom? So I invited chapters from a variety of museums, from arts museums to science to children's to natural history, civil rights centers, and even animal sanctuaries. And I invited different perspectives from within those museums: curators, CEOs, museum directors, archivists, exhibition designers, educators. This is what I found out. Museums, while considering empathy as something that is part of their work, when for the first time asked specifically about it, they had a difficult time articulating what empathy was for them and how it looked in a museum setting. Except for a few examples, it was clear that this was not something that they thought about or acted upon intentionally or strategically. The outcome of the chapters contributed to the fostering empathy through museums helped me outline the 3 ways how museums have been thinking about empathy: communicating and practicing empathy as an institutional core value, thereby role modeling the importance of empathy in their institutional policies and practices; education and design aimed at raising awareness about people, places, and subjects of study outside of our normal experience; or empathy as a human phenomenon and an intentional outcome of a museum experience. Institutional empathy includes areas from HR policies and diversity of workforce to how an institution reacts to social events in its neighborhood. It could be as simple as a helpful and a welcoming sign, as in the Hickory Museum of Art in North Carolina, or bringing community together for a dialogue, as in the Science Museum of Minnesota's exhibition on race. This approach, educational and design tool approach, utilizes empathy to design exhibits, content, and experiences to teach and educate the public on a specific topic related to the museum's mission. This picture is from the cafeteria of the latest addition to the Smithsonian Institution Museum of African American History and Culture. And you'll see that it's the famous 1960s, diner, nonviolent diner sit-in protest. It really pulls the people in. As you are eating, you feel like you're a part of that moment. Experiential learning aimed at increasing emotional involvement with the subjects presented is another way. So this mostly considers empathy as an intentional outcome, although they don't always say, or they didn't used to say list empathy, but empathy was always considered as a byproduct of such experiences. This approach considers empathy as an outcome of a museum experience and strategically explores and cultivates empathy as a human phenomenon that could be channeled towards social good. This is a playful exhibit from the Exploratorium in San Francisco. It is one of the few exhibitions or halls that dedicated in any museum that I know to our humanness. It explores our humanity in different aspects, incorporating scientific and social studies as basis. And this is a very, one of my favorite games, Sip or Squirt. It teaches people about how to share, actually, why sharing is important, because with those blue and red buttons, you can control the others' access to water. And your choice at the end, if both share, everybody wins. But if one closes the access to the other's water, there's a basically dead end. And it just, through play, you find yourself in that situation and recognize your own reaction to a dilemma like this in real time. So I don't mean to get you dizzy, but I just wanted to share with you, just to illustrate the point that, you know, the museum's understanding of empathy is not linear. I asked the authors of the Fostering Empathy Through Museums to give me 5 words describing their journey within the context of their chapter, whatever exhibition project or museum they were talking about. Where did they put empathy in the scale of their work? And as you can see, empathy is often considered a starting point or somewhere in the middle, but rarely is intended as an outcome of an experience. So my goal is to basically increase that. Another lesson learned from the same book was a new pattern that was emerging. When we look at museums fostering empathy in one of the 3 ways described above, it turns out they also have a common strength in 5 ways they are able to contribute to empathy building in our world. At any given time and place, there are multiple ways of looking at and seeing a particular object, issue, or problem, as well as many ways that beings coexist and make sense of the universe. Museums that encourage us to understand, emotionally engage with, and contemplate this profound truth help us to become more responsive to the needs of those around us and of our environment. They help us gain a perspective-altering lens that awakens our sense of connectedness, compassion, presence, and purpose. In this way, museums are uniquely positioned to foster empathy in our world. And here are 5 ways how museums can do this. By being a safe space for dialogue and encountering the other. Through their social and educational mission, museums can provide a safe space for encountering our collective behavior, knowledge, complex histories, and values. By putting people in proximity to other people's lived experiences, the artifacts from their cultures, and their stories, museums can help us awaken to different realities and multiple perspectives that exist around us. For example, Dialogue House exhibit in Hamburg, Germany, their immersive approach helps those of us who might not otherwise think about the plight of people with different abilities, come to experience and better understand their hopes, values, and struggles as similar to our own or to those of people we know. Personal and multifaceted encounters with people from other cultures, orientations, abilities, and backgrounds, and their ideas, stories, and artifacts create opportunities for authentic dialogue with the other, someone who's different from us, but shares our world. This serves to challenge any biases and stereotypes we may hold, while increasing our capacity for empathy. Storytelling is another way. Museums not only tell stories, but as institutions, they are a form of storytelling themselves. Our brains are wired to retain information and make meaning in story format. Before writing was invented, our ancestors relied on storytelling to transfer critical life-saving knowledge and wisdom, and to help bond a community together. Modern research has shown that storytelling inspires empathy building by allowing us to engage emotionally with the experiences of other people, even those with whom we may have little in common or we may never ever encounter. Telling stories from the point of view of the people and cultures featured can also increase our sense of shared humanity. And we see how others, as we see how others face fears, biases, and challenges similar to our own. And because museum exhibits are strong in scholarship and research, and therefore can be a trusted source of information, through storytelling, they can provide a learning experience that engages both hearts and minds. In this example from the Tenement Museum in New York, one can visit the homes of immigrants at the turn of the century and learn about their lives, hopes, and challenges, while in close proximity to authentic lived spaces and experiences. This enhances our understanding of different ways of experiencing the world, which increases our capacity for empathy. Experiential learning. Museums create experiential learning opportunities. To increase empathy, it helps not only to provide knowledge and stories, but to create experiences that engage us in other ways. Research suggests that experiential learning is an effective way to increase learning in general and empathy in particular. Museums help us to experience empathy by offering interactive exhibits that encourage more than an intellectual understanding. For example, the lunch counter simulation experience at the Center for Civil and Human Rights in Atlanta leaves one with a first-hand understanding of what it was like to be in the shoes of a civil rights protester in the 60s, enduring verbal and physical intimidation and racism, while participating in a non-violent sit-in protest at a whites-only diner. Here, visitors are invited to sit on a dining stool and put their hands on the lunch counter, where a sign ominously reads, "How long can you last?" A timer on the mirror behind the counter facing visitors monitors their endurance in seconds and minutes as the experience unfolds. Direct verbal insults come through the headphones, as well as kicks and shoves that shake the dining stool. This simulation allows visitors, most of whom can only last a few minutes, to put themselves in the shoes of those civil rights protesters who had to endure these insults for hours, putting their lives at stake. Sadly, a struggle that still continues today. Experiential learning sometimes requires a sense of vulnerability. As we have just discussed in the Dialogue House immersive exhibitions, here individuals who are blind, deaf, or mute become tour guides for visitors who experience a perspective shift in the way they experience the world around them without a sense of sight, hearing, or speech. We often learn better when we are engaged with all of our senses. So providing sensory-rich experiences, or sometimes strategically limiting our access to them to help us realize how much they shape our experience and perception of the world, allows us to imagine different ways of being, which can help deepen the lessons of empathy imparted by museums. Museums are places where one can experience a sense of awe and wonder. How might one go about changing habitual and entrenched perspectives and behavior towards another? This usually requires more than just information. It requires some kind of paradigm shift, often caused by a transformative life event or some kind of deep learning. For example, when we look at the famous Earthrise photograph from 2007, we can imagine the overview effect experienced by astronauts seeing our planet from outer space for the first time. This experience induces a new sense of scale, a strong sense of awe, connectedness to something greater than ourselves, and compassion and love for the whole planet. Wonder often occurs around an extraordinary experience, something that is otherwise inaccessible to visitors in their daily lives. Extraordinary experiences should trigger two reactions, emotional and cognitive. The fleeting emotional reaction, the wow moment, is most effective if it is followed up by a cognitive reaction, the how moment. In a museum setting where there are facilitators and docents available, the how moment can take the form of further experimentation, dialogue, questioning, perspective taking, and reflection. Since awe has been tied to a sense of oneness with others and altruism, a museum's ability to foster awe can also help with the goal of increasing empathy and compassion. Museums also provide a safe space for contemplation. Museums encourage contemplation of our world by providing a space where we can slow down and be with what is before us without needing to perform in any way. Unlike many everyday settings where the goal is clear, people are invited to explore in museums on their own schedule, moving from exhibit to exhibit as they see fit, following their own internal guidelines. This naturally allows for a more contemplative and reflective experience. Through this reflection, museum patrons can achieve a deeper understanding of the viewpoints and viewpoints of others, and recognize their own connection to all of humanity and the planet. As I moved through my explorations of empathy, or within empathy, I wanted to know what makes a transformative empathetic experience. Is it only storytelling, like we saw in the Tenement Museum, that is causing people to feel empathy? Or are there other ingredients that are at play? To dive deeper into this question, I have created this framework and posed these 3 essential questions to the contributing authors. Who and what is the object of your empathy? How do we perceive the other? Or is there an other, as some philosophies and traditions of wisdom suggest? What are the ingredients of the alchemy of empathy? Because it was clear at this point that empathy is not just science or art, but a combination of both and more. And what is the scope and the spectrum of empathy? To what end we are trying to foster empathy and learn about empathy? What is our ultimate goal with this work? In this chart, and there's a reason why I use the drop metaphor for this, I will explain later. I invited contributing authors from different perspectives. A neuroscientist talked about how we perceive the other from a neuroscientist perspective through the brain. An artist talked about how we can observe the universe through the eye of the heart. And then another contributor talked about augmented reality, or the conscious experience, as some philosophies suggest that mind is actually everywhere and we are just a result of it. And the worldview, how we are brought up, the stories we have been hearing all this time. Just to give you a quick example of the augmented reality, this chapter articulated that so we go into the world with an identity, right? I. But in augmented reality or virtual reality, we have avatars, and avatars have their own relationship with other avatars, and then it could be in relationship to a human or an object or an animal or a plant. At the end, there were, I believe, at least like 28 different identities that just one user might encounter when going into the virtual world. So if we cannot even figure out our identity on this world, it scares me to think that, what's the technology, the power of technology, how it can affect our world in the future. And the second question was the alchemy of empathy. And I call this the alchemy of empathy because it is not just science or art and combination of both, but more. And I came up with, these ingredients that I found out from the projects that I've been involved in. Intentionality, intersectionality, proximity, curiosity, play, vulnerability, awe and wonder, contemplation and nuance, storytelling, synchronicity, collective journeying, breaking bread, optimism and hope. Of course, one can add to this list forever, for example, humor, or and many other examples we can add. But what I found out from the chapters contributed to the book is that, for example, if somebody was writing about vulnerability, you could see the ingredients of play and curiosity in that experience. So these are not just like pieces of a puzzle. They don't have sharp corners or edges. They're almost like water drops. They share the same attributes as a greater thing that they belong. But And they're sort of like interbeings, that they exchange attributes depending on the context and the outcome that you may want to reach. For example, curiosity, play, humor, informal inquiry is at play. In awe and wonder, scale and lived experience are factors. Just like we see this beautiful sequoia, slice of sequoia tree, which shows our existence on this planet, basically just a single line in this magnificent being. It just gives us a sense of humbleness and humility to see ourselves in a larger scale. Or breaking bread. It could be a dining room conversation. So it doesn't have to be at a museum, but we can design what makes a dining room conversation more empathetic and bring it to our museum experience. It includes perhaps showing up, just, or creating brave spaces where people can just be themselves. Or collective journeying. An example of this could be a pilgrimage, or people going to soccer stadiums, to watch, soccer. They have this, shared vision and understanding, almost like they have their own rituals, and they contemplate around the same idea, which creates empathy among that in-group. So there could be a problem, of course, with that, because if that in-group is very closed on its own, how are they going to react or engage with the other groups? So we have to be also mindful of all kinds of responses to these ideas. And lastly, the designing for empathy, the outcome. So we need to begin with the end in mind. And alignment of vision will also help museums to identify their allies or their fellow travelers along the journey of empathy building. Is it that we have to create better ethics and values? Are we trying to create empathy for better education or entrepreneurship? Or for the environment? Are we using empathy towards innovation and design or societal progress? In reality, they're of course all interdependent. They are not just on their own. But just to dive deeper, it just helps to just say them out loud and then invite thinking and research on these ideas, whether they really hold place or not, and how do they look in different settings. So here I would like to share 7 perspectives to consider when designing for empathy. And you may not like all of them because it is not easy. And we live at a time that this empathy deficit is a major problem. And unlike many generations before us, we have some new tools available to us, such as these institutions that we have created: museums, libraries, performing arts centers, schools, community centers, and informal learning platforms, and also technologies. So we have to really think outside box and find ways to connect our knowledge and lessons learned from a variety of disciplines, institutions, industries, to figure out, what can get us out of this mess so that we can break that vicious cycle of empathy deficit. So I would say begin with prepare for a long journey. Empathy building is not governed by an on-off switch. So you cannot just turn it on when you need it. You have to invest in it and spend time with it and explore it and innovate through it. It's a journey that awaits our participation individually, institutionally, and culturally. So we cannot also expect an institution to solve all this problem, or a single individual. It requires all of our participation into the solving of the problem. As discussed so far in these presentations, museums hold the key ingredients of empathy building, perhaps more than any other institution that our civilization has produced. All kinds of museums are uniquely equipped to serve as platforms that foster empathy as a life skill through experiential learning, play, dialogue, authentic experiences of awe and wonder, and contemplation. We at museums and other informal learning platforms must utilize all of the tools at our disposal to move towards an empathy-driven worldview that can appreciate our diversity as well as the overarching or underlying oneness within this diversity. Choose the path least explored. Some people might have second thoughts about it, but if we really are serious about solving this problem, this is what we must do. And we don't really have prescriptions ready, or we don't have solutions ready. We are still working on it. So it helps to experiment, and the more places that we can allocate for this experimentation and sharing of knowledge, the quicker we can get to our goal. So we have just had an overview of the three major ways in which museums are currently employing empathy: as an institutional value, as an educational tool to design better exhibitions and programs, as a human phenomenon, a life skill, and an intentional outcome of a museum experience that is worthy of exploration on its own. While all of these avenues offer their own challenges and rewards, and are equally important, not to mention that they are definitely interdependent, you cannot think of one without the other. The least explored path is the third one, where museums intentionally design experiences that foster empathy as a life skill. In this way, the museum is not attempting to educate on a factual topic, but instead enabling self-knowledge by being a mirror to our humanness, an awareness of our selfish and not so selfish tendencies, how we make meaning, what drives our behavior, and how we make our everyday choices. Empowering individuals to explore their own emotions and examine how they intersect with those of other people is more critical than ever. Establish shared values, terminologies, standards, and best practices. Before embarking on a collective journey, it is essential to agree upon the shared values, terminologies. As mentioned earlier, an exploration of the three essential questions here would be helpful. How do we identify who's the other for us in this project? What is the object of our empathy? What are the ingredients, the scope, and the spectrum of empathy building? Once we have a common understanding, we will still have challenges, but at least we can go back and refine and make our understanding more viable for all that is involved. Considering unifying narratives and the oneness mindset is also very important. Museums are custodians of our human values, knowledge, and cultures. They present a mirror through which we can observe and learn from our past relationship with each other and the environment, create new narratives, and more importantly, imagine the future. We intuitively know that some things have the power to bring us closer, such as storytelling, pilgrimage, music, dance, humor, and play. What are some other ingredients, narratives, or design elements of empathy that we intuitively know to cause a perspective-shifting, transformational experience? How can we learn about these ingredients and discover new ones from experts from all walks of life? And don't just use technology, help design it as well. Empathy is essential for the success of the future workforce, as it leads to creative thinking, adaptability, leadership, collaboration, entrepreneurship, and innovation. It is also essential for the development of caring mindsets, compassionate worldviews, and wise decision-making that enable our collective survival. There's an increasing need for empathy to help us connect with each other and find our purpose in a complex world, especially with the growth of powerful technologies such as the artificial intelligence. As empathy is an essential life skill, all industries and institutions would benefit from an investment in empathy building. For example, the IT industry is the most powerful industry right now, shaping our collective future through their innovations. Most IT leaders express the need for empathy in product development, but are they truly investing enough in developing their employees' or leaders' empathy? Most museums are often clients of IT firms. They purchase their products to better convey their content to public. Can museums move beyond being a client, but become an inspiration and a design partner through shared investments in empathy building? Empathy is one of the few remaining competitive advantages of our humanness that cannot yet be replicated by AI. As partners in cross-industrial dialogue, empathy building, prototyping, and innovation, museums can also enhance our understanding of the pitfalls and the potential of empathy and inform the design of those powerful technologies so that they embody much needed empathy and compassion in their DNA. Empathy as a shared value is a concept that is being developed by Empathy Building Through Museums initiative and was inspired by the Shared Value Initiative founded by Michael Porter, a Harvard Business School professor, and Mike Kramer of FSG. They describe the shared value concept as follows. Shared value is a management strategy in which companies find business opportunities in social problems. While philanthropy and CSR, corporate social responsibility, focus efforts on giving back or minimizing the harm business has on society, shared value focuses company leaders on maximizing the competitive value of solving social problems in new customers and markets, cost savings, talent retention, and more. So how can we position empathy as a shared value field so that we can draw the attention of other industries and so that they can consider empathy something that they should invest in, not just to create better products, but also really empathy in society. So my initiative believes that human behavior and empathy lie at the heart of most solutions to our global economic, societal, environmental problems, and museums are uniquely equipped but underutilized platforms that foster empathy. As empathy is an essential future workforce skill with economic, industrial, societal, and environmental implications, it should be further explored as a shared value field for industries and communities to invest in it collectively. Finally, develop and lead a collective innovation strategy. Although there is much content on the importance of empathy in personal, industrial, environmental domains, such content often remains siloed in academia, politics, or industry-specific discussions. This results in knowledge gaps and missed opportunities to join forces and put our best efforts and strengths collectively towards innovation of long-term, evidence-based, sustainable solutions. The current state of our global problems, as listed in the UN Sustainable Development Goals, should be an indication that empathy should be at the heart of all solutions moving forward. Our efforts in empathy building should go well beyond one-off sponsorship of events or occasional workshops and ideation sessions. Instead, we have an obligation to design a long-term strategy with multiple, layered, positive outcomes that could deliver benefits in the areas of personal, institutional, industrial, societal, and environmental progress. Only then we could start addressing the elephant in the room instead of battling with the many symptoms of its very existence. Going back to the concept of oneness as a mindset, I'd like to conclude with the wisdom of Rumi again. He says, "You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean within a drop." If you scoop up a handful of water from the ocean, it becomes a much smaller body of water, merely a drop compared to the ocean. However, it is nothing but the ocean, only at a much smaller scale. It has the exact same attributes as the ocean. This is true for the essence of our humanity as well. We may look very different in different shapes, abilities, colors, and sizes, but our experience, essence, is always one and the same. Empathy can help us experience this beautiful truth in meaningful ways. And if we join forces, we can become an ocean of empathy builders, designing healing solutions for our world. Thank you. Should I stop sharing, maybe?
Thank you so much, Elif. That was a lot of information about empathy and the foundation of your work, and also all the experiences you collected from different museums. I just want to ask our listeners if there are any questions. We can start with them. You have the possibility to ask questions to the question and answers or the chat, whatever fits you best. So please feel free, everyone, to ask whatever you like. While we are waiting for the first ones, Elif, if it's okay for you, I just start asking because my whole head is full with questions after your presentation. In our project, in Identity on the Line, we are working with personal narratives. And in many cases, we want to use these personal narratives to create empathy in our visitors for the experiences of the people we have interviewed, the personal narratives we have collected. Meaning we are not creating a story, but we take a personal narrative where we of course choose special aspects, and then we present it to get our visitor to understand what really happened. So my question would be to you, can you overdo to evoke empathy? Can you present a personal narrative, lived experiences? Can you present them too heavily? Can you present them that you couldn't evoke empathy because it's too personal, too much feelings? Any experiences with that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think the fine point there is, you know, and with the best intentions, we try to convey the stories and try to get people to empathize with the others, you know, challenges or journey. But at the end of the day, what makes change in people is learning something about themselves. You know, if there's a way to get them to react and discover maybe their own biases or how they were looking at this before, but now they look different. Not just the act of doing that, but also getting them to realize that, hey, this just happened. You just changed perspective. And this is what, and it should be very subtle, not in a non-clashing way. But at the end of the day, I think that's what really makes empathy effective, if people can learn something about their own humanness. And then that experience goes on with them through life, and the results of that encounter mirroring themselves through that experience, it results in many aspects in everyday life.
Okay, thank you very much. I see we have the first questions here, so I just keep on going, Elif, if it's okay for you.
Sure. Sure.
The next question we have is from one of our partners, Kaya Sirok, and she asked, do you have your own favorite object of empathy, and where, in which museum is it located? What is its message?
Yes, thank you. This is a great question, actually.
What would you say to that?
Yeah, object could be taken as a physical object, but also the object as a concept, right? Like, what are we trying to empathize with? And through empathizing with different people, the environment, what is our ultimate goal? I think if I have to answer that, I don't have a particular object at a museum, but my object of empathy is oneness. So that's what I'm trying to do and achieve with my work, to create empathy towards our interconnectedness and interdependence, to create a realization within myself and others that we are all parts of something greater than ourselves. So in that case, there is really no particular other that I have to empathize with, but it's the ongoing effort on all aspects of life that I try to remind myself that we are all one. You know, this is all a part of the same thing. And basically, you know, old wisdom tells us, right, what goes around comes around, you know, that sort of thing. So being mindful of our oneness is my object of empathy.
That was a good answer. Okay, let's have more questions here. The next question to you. Since you mostly worked in the US with the museums, but also with some in the EU, is there a difference in the museum staff and the audience response on both continents in the wish to take action towards empathy? More plastic ask, are the US museums and their audiences more flexible in this than the European?
That's a really good question. I mean, it definitely, the understanding of empathy and reaction to empathy changes from context to context, and especially from culture to culture. Even the language has a lot to do, because in some languages, some words do not exist that, you know, in other traditions might explain empathy in like much nuanced way, you know. So it is definitely different. I think here in the US, people are realizing, because of the times that we are living through, and we have an election coming up, that empathy is a must. So it is more and more becoming a sort of like a life raft that people are looking up to. And I do hope that this will inspire many institutions, you know, arts museums, natural history museums, air and space museums, you know, all kinds of historic house museums, to really jump in and meet people where they are, and just be a resource and be a safe space for them to explore their own selves. And this has a lot to do with the well-being too, you know, it's creating those spaces. So I do think that it is very different in Europe, and I'm from Turkey originally, so it would be different there. And in the US, of course, I don't want to have like a broad wash of, you know, like in America, in Europe. I mean, it really depends on the context, even the exhibition or the experience, what the reactions will be. But the understanding of empathy basically is driven from or shaped by our worldview. So the reason that I'm talking about empathy within the context of oneness, because I grew up in a culture that valued oneness. And so I can see that empathy has a value in it. But for others, it may be a completely different experience.
Okay, thank you very much, Elif. I'm just going on here because we have some more questions and time is running out. The next question is, time is often essential when scaling audience activities within the museum. How to best arrange for meaningful interaction sessions, meetings within the museum? So if you have this time issue, you don't have enough time to do everything you want. So what do you do? How to best arrange the interaction sessions?
Absolutely. I mean, this is a very, yeah, it takes a long time to answer the question, but it is basically, you're right. I mean, an audience's attention span is basically, what is like 15 seconds or even less than that per object. So they don't linger. So it is important that I think if we address this as a collective approach, you know, like an art museum experience, you know, they can catch somebody at this place, and then at the next experience, a natural history museum can catch that same person and add up to that experience. But attention span and the visitation attitudes are definitely something to consider. And I mean, we can go deeper into that, but it's going to take a long time, and I need to know more about the type of the museum and everything. So there's not one single prescription, I think.
Thank you, Elif. I just go on here. I have a question from one of the partners in EON. Is it possible to hear more about the Augmented Reality project? Maybe this is a question is it possible to get a little bit more information from you, which we maybe can share also with others about this project? Then we don't have to spend so much time with it now, as we have some more questions here.
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand which.
The Augmented Reality project, I think it was the project where you had this glasses where you were telling about the identities you could choose.
Yeah.
So if some more information which you
definitely
can share.
I mean, absolutely. So there's a chapter about that in the Designing for Empathy book that's only about that. So it is the Augmented Reality chapter in the first part of the book. Let me know if you need me to send you a copy, or you can just
no, yeah, we can, as I said, we have them here, so we can share them. Okay, the next question: how do you understand the difference between empathy and sympathy or pity within the context of museum exhibition?
Yeah. So empathy The difference between sympathy and empathy is empathy instigates someone to act, instead of sympathy is just like, oh, you know, just feeling sad for them or sorry for them, but really not internalizing the problem as if your own. What empathy does is internalizes the problem because you feel like the other. Therefore, you want to solve that problem.
Okay, thank you, Elif. I'm sorry, I'm hurrying through the questions here. We have 2 more, which I can see now. And I think if you have any more questions, please bring them on now, because we have not so much time left. So the next question would be, is the human communication between people better fixed to evoke empathy than technology and objects? So if we want to evoke if we want to evoke empathy, should we go for communication? Or should we go for technology and objects, but maybe or objects? So what are the most important aspects here?
Yeah. I think the most important aspect is to create a lived experience opportunity. It has to be an experience. So even, I mean, encountering an object it could be an experience, but you have to sort of amplify it, you know, not just seeing the object, but you have to learn something through that object about yourself at the end. And each person, of course, you know, learns in different ways, right? I mean, Smithsonian Institution actually had a great study. They called it IPOP, information, people, objects, and physical, tactile experiences. So how people reacted to each of these. So what they found out is that like people going into exhibition, they come with one of those areas formed within themselves. For example, I go to a museum and I'm an objects person. I love looking at objects, and that's all I care. And a successful exhibition should be able to turn the perspective or the inclination of the person from an object person to maybe an ideas person, so that that person suddenly realizes that there are no ideas behind it. And that also is the definition of perspective shift. Or through a physical or tactile experience, an object person goes beyond an understanding of a visual object from afar, but when you engage it with your senses, it adds another level of learning. I don't know if that makes sense.
It made sense. And as I said, I'm sure you could talk much longer about that. And unfortunately, our time is limited. I have one more question. I think we say that's the last question for now. The question is very good, I think. What is the role of museum staff in showing the empathy to the audience? Because it is, of course, a two-sided experience. It's very important who is trying to get the empathy, if we are not talking about technology here. So the human beings, the museum employees working in the museums, meeting the people. Can you say a little bit more about their role in this building process?
Yeah. So it is really interesting. I mean, museum staff showing empathy to others, but also who's staff empathy, right? I mean, are they able to voice their concerns in meetings? Are they able to share their ideas? This is a cycle, you know, this is a cyclical thing. So you cannot really think, that's why we didn't discuss it in depth, but it is very true that this journey of empathy, once you touch empathy, you actually have to go all the way back to yourself, to the institution, how we are treating our employees. In return, that defines how the employees are treating others that come through their doors. What are their values? What are their ethics? So it cannot be really separated. You cannot expect people to be empathetic just on their own while the culture doesn't support them all the time. It is very, very difficult. I mean, some people can be, but then, you know, after a while you say, I don't care, you know, like I'm just here making my living. Why should I care? So it is important to have institutional empathy towards employees in their hiring methodology, or, you know, who's around the table when decisions are made, so that everybody can feel empowered and reflect that same empathy to people coming through their door.
Thank you very much, Elif. I think that was a perfect ending of this session because we were somehow back to the wholeness, we were back to the oneness, we were back to the circle where everything is connected to each other. I just see one more question here. Yes, I don't know if you saw that. Thank you for an enlightening talk, Elif. So thank you, Andre, for joining.
Thank you.
Okay, so thanks to all of you for taking the time to join us. And Elif, maybe you can stay one more second with me that we can have a connection. And to all of you, thanks for now. To all the partners in Eon, see you in 10 minutes. And all the others, I wish you a great afternoon. Bye.
Thank you.